The sharp buzz of the clippers echoed like a hornet's swarm in the sterile white nurse's office, a sound that would haunt Ariel Daniels for the rest of her life. Strands of her thick, carefully braided hair fell to the tiled floor like dying leaves in a cruel autumn. Each lock represented months of careful styling, days of silent battles with alopecia, and years of hiding the bald patches she'd so desperately tried to keep secret. At only 12 years old, Ariel was already an expert at concealment, not of misdeeds but of pain. Standing a few feet away, Miss Evelyn Rohr watched the scene with a cold satisfaction in her eyes, like a hawk circling prey. She wasn't just a teacher enforcing a policy, she was someone who had found the perfect target, quiet, artistic, vulnerable. Ariel's mother was away on active duty, her father deployed overseas. There was no one to protect her but her own soft voice and trembling hands, and Ms. Rohr knew it. "Keep going," Evelyn ordered the nurse, her tone sharp, unwavering. "Every strand." Nurse Adams hesitated. Her conscience screamed against the act, but the pressure from Evelyn, the school's discipline code, and fear for her job kept her hands moving. She glanced apologetically at Ariel, whose silent sobs grew heavier as the clippers shaved away more than just hair. With each buzz, a part of her dignity was stripped away, her identity erased. Across the hallway, Maya Thompson, Ariel's best friend, gripped her phone, recording through a crack in the door. Her hands trembled with both fear and fury. Her instincts told her that no one in this school was going to protect Ariel. If anyone was going to fight, it would have to be her. And that started with evidence. By the time the clippers went silent, the floor was littered with black braids and silent screams. Ariel sat still, frozen, her scalp raw and exposed. She looked smaller than ever, crumpled in the nurse's chair, her hoodie now pulled tightly over her head. Evelyn Rohr, satisfied with her display of power, walked out with her chin high, convinced she had broken another child into obedience. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the camera in Maya's pocket had already started a storm that would spiral far beyond the school walls. That night, as Ariel sat silently in the back seat of her mother's car, Naomi Daniels fought to hold back her tears. Every glance in the rearview mirror at her daughter's hollow eyes sent another crack through her heart. She wanted to say something, anything, but how do you tell a child that the world is supposed to be safe when it clearly isn't? When they got home, Ariel quietly climbed the stairs and locked herself in her room. Naomi stood at the door for minutes, then hours. No sound came. No response. Only silence. Finally, Naomi reached for her phone with shaking hands and left a voicemail for her husband. Her voice, usually confident and composed, broke with every word. "Eric, something terrible happened at school. They hurt Ariel. Badly. I don't know what to do. Please, come home." Thousands of miles away, deep in the Afghan desert, Lieutenant Colonel Eric Daniels stood in the hot wind outside his barracks, his eyes squinting into the fading sun. He had just returned from a long patrol, dust still clinging to his boots, when his phone buzzed. One missed call. A voicemail from Naomi. He played the message. By the time her words ended, his entire body had turned to ice. He stood motionless for a beat, then sat heavily on his bunk. A second notification flashed, an email from Maya containing a video. The second he hit play and saw Ariel, his baby girl, sitting alone in a chair while a woman he recognized from his past ran clippers over her head with a twisted smirk, something inside him snapped. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't about rules or discipline. It was war. He remembered Evelyn Rohr well. Years ago she'd served under his command. Her arrogance, insubordination, and blatant racial bias had forced Eric to discharge her. She had filed false reports against black soldiers. She tried to undermine his authority. He'd shut her down, professionally and permanently. And now she had resurfaced, this time going after the one thing he loved most in the world. Eric's breath came in short gasps. The silence of the barracks was shattered by the sound of his gear hitting the floor. He picked up the phone and dialed his commanding officer. "Sir, I need emergency leave. Now, something's happened to my daughter. I have to go home." The officer paused. Eric Daniels wasn't the kind of man to run from duty. When he spoke, it meant something was gravely wrong. "You're cleared. A transport leaves tonight. Be ready." Eric hung up, already packing. Rage, sorrow, and something primal stirred in his blood. He had fought enemies across the world, but this was personal. The woman who had once undermined his command had now targeted his child. And she had no idea what she had just unleashed. As the military plane soared into the night sky, Eric stared out the window, fists clenched. Every moment away from Ariel burned like fire. He promised himself one thing. By the time this was over, Evelyn Rohr would know exactly what justice looked like. And this time there would be no mercy. The military transport plane landed with a jolt just after dawn. Lieutenant Colonel Eric Daniels stepped off the aircraft in full dress uniform, his boots hitting American soil like the steady beat of war drums. He didn't stop to rest. He didn't stop to breathe. Every second wasted was another second Ariel lived with pain, and he was done letting pain lead. His wife Naomi was waiting just outside the base gates, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold the world together. When she saw him, she rushed into his arms, breaking down in silent sobs. Eric held her tightly, his eyes darting behind her, searching. "Where is she?" he asked. Naomi swallowed hard. "Home. She hasn't spoken much. Barely eats. Just stares." Without another word, Eric climbed into the car. Back home, Ariel sat curled under her blanket, knees drawn to her chest, sketchbook open but untouched. The once vibrant pages were now blank. The pencils lay beside her like abandoned soldiers, no longer sharp, no longer needed. A knock came at her door. Then silence. She didn't answer. The doorknob turned. "Ariel," Eric's voice was low, gentle, shaken, but steady. "It's me. Daddy's home." The blanket stirred. A single eye peeked out. He walked slowly to her bed, sitting on the floor beside her, his posture unthreatening, respectful of the fortress she had built around herself. "I saw the video," he whispered. "I saw what she did to you." Tears welled up in her eyes, but Ariel didn't speak. "I should have protected you," he said, voice trembling. "That's my job. I've defended this country with everything I have, and still they got to you." His hand reached for hers, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, with the tiniest shift, Ariel placed her fingers in his. Eric squeezed gently. "But I'm here now. And I'm not leaving. Ever." That moment was the turning point. Ariel didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. She didn't pull away. That night, the Daniels family sat together at the dinner table for the first time in weeks. Ariel didn't eat much, but she listened. She watched her father. There was something different in his eyes, something fierce like the stillness before a storm. After dinner, Eric stepped into the living room and picked up the remote. He turned on the TV. The video Maya had filmed was now national news. It had gone viral, millions of views, countless reposts. But what chilled him wasn't the number of views. It was the comments. "This is what happens when discipline is weaponized. She should be fired, sued, and jailed. Where are the school board members? Where is the outrage from the system?" The outrage was there, but it was scattered, unorganized. The school had issued a hollow one-day suspension for Evelyn Rohr and a tone-deaf statement citing policy enforcement. It was a slap in the face. Eric turned off the TV. "That's it," he said to Naomi. "No more statements. No more waiting. We're going public." Naomi looked up, eyes wide. "What do you mean?" "We're going to war. Not with weapons, but with truth. With the law. With exposure." Naomi nodded slowly. "So where do we start?" Eric smiled grimly. "With someone who's not afraid to hit back harder." 2 days later, they were sitting in the high-rise office of Grace Yamada, a civil rights attorney with a national reputation. Her success rate was legendary. Her courtroom presence? Lethal. Grace leaned forward, hands clasped. "I've seen the footage. I've read the school statement. And I've dug into Evelyn Rohr's background." She paused. "This isn't just discrimination. This is personal. It's vengeance." Eric's jaw tightened. "She served under me. At Fort Benning. She was insubordinate, unhinged. Filed false complaints against black officers. I discharged her. And now she found your daughter," Grace finished. "This wasn't just cruelty. It was strategic." Grace pulled out a legal pad and began jotting down names. "Here's what we're going to do. We build a case airtight and public. We get the media involved. We subpoena the school board, Evelyn's records, her military discharge. We shine so much light on this they'll have nowhere to hide." Naomi swallowed. "Do you really think we can win?" Grace smiled. "I don't fight to lose." Just as they stepped outside Grace's office that evening, they were met with something unexpected. Protesters. Dozens of them. Parents, students, neighbors, all holding signs reading "Justice for Ariel," "Fire Evelyn Rohr," "Children deserve dignity." Ariel, watching from the back seat, blinked in disbelief. Maya Thompson stood near the front of the crowd, holding a poster she had drawn herself. It showed Ariel with her hair gone, but her head held high, surrounded by words like strength, honor, courage. For the first time in weeks, Ariel smiled. This wasn't just her battle anymore. The protest outside Lakeside Elementary grew larger with each passing hour. What began as a small vigil led by Maya and a few neighborhood parents had now swelled into a movement. Media vans lined the street, their satellite dishes aimed skyward. Reporters huddled beneath umbrellas, broadcasting live to millions across the country. The story of Ariel Daniels had struck a chord deeper than anyone anticipated. It wasn't just about a girl whose head was shaved. It was about justice, power, and the misuse of authority. Inside the school, Principal Thomas Wexley watched the crowd from his second-floor office, his hands clasped behind his back. His face, once stoic and unreadable, now bore a sheen of sweat. He knew the tide had turned. The one-day suspension he handed down had been meant to quell the noise. It had done the opposite. Evelyn Rohr, standing in the corner of his office, wore a look of uneasy defiance. "It'll blow over," she muttered, as if saying it aloud would make it true. "These people always overreact. Give them a week." Wexley turned sharply, his voice low but tight with strain. "We have national news crews outside. The governor's office has called twice. And the board is in chaos. This is not blowing over." Evelyn's smile faltered. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. "It was a grooming violation," she insisted. "I was enforcing school policy." "And you enjoyed it," Wexley said coldly. "Everyone can see it in that video." Evelyn's face flushed. "Don't act like you didn't benefit from my discipline over the years. You needed someone to enforce the rules and I did it without question." "That's not discipline," he snapped. "That's abuse." Meanwhile, in a packed community center just a few miles away, Grace Yamada stood at a podium, flanked by Eric and Naomi Daniels. Hundreds filled the room, parents, teachers, students, veterans, each of them drawn by the same question. How could this have happened? Grace's voice rang with clarity. "This case is not just about Ariel. It's about a system that enabled this abuse to happen. It's about the administrators who covered it up, the teachers who stood silent, and the policies that allowed a personal vendetta to be passed off as enforcement." Applause erupted. Ariel sat near the front, her hoodie off for the first time in public, her scalp exposed without shame. It wasn't easy. She still felt the stares, the sympathetic glances, but she sat tall. She wasn't hiding anymore. Grace continued. "We will file a civil suit against Evelyn Rohr, Principal Wexley, and the Lakeside School District for gross misconduct, emotional trauma, and racial discrimination. And let me be clear, this is just the beginning." After the meeting, a tall man in a trench coat approached Eric quietly. His voice was low, cautious. "Name's Malik Reed. I'm an investigative journalist. Been following corruption in local school boards for years. I think what happened to your daughter connects to something much bigger." Eric eyed him warily. "Go on." Malik pulled out a folder and handed it to him. Inside were photocopies of internal memos, financial transactions, and emails. Lakeside has a slush fund, a secret legal defense account that's paid off families in the past. Quiet settlements, non-disclosure agreements, hush money. Your case isn't the first. Naomi gasped. "You mean they've done this before?" "More times than I can count," Malik said grimly. "But this time they targeted the wrong family. You fought back." Eric scanned the documents, anger rising with each page. "Why hasn't anyone exposed this?" Malik shrugged. "Too much influence. Too many favors. But I've got something else. An IT technician at the school contacted me. Says he has security footage from inside the nurse's office. Unedited. He wants to meet. Tonight." Eric nodded, his soldier's instincts kicking in. "We'll go with you." That night, in a dimly lit cafe, Malik, Eric, and Naomi sat across from a nervous young man in a hoodie. His name was Alex Baker, a quiet tech who had worked for the school district for 5 years. He slid a flash drive across the table. "I was told to erase all footage from that day," Alex whispered. "But I couldn't. I made a backup." Eric's fingers clenched around the drive. "What's on it?" "Everything," Alex said. The moment Ariel was dragged in. Evelyn's commands. Her expression. The nurse's protests. It's all there. No sound, but you can see it all. Naomi's voice cracked. "Why are you helping us?" Alex looked down. "Because I have a little sister. And I'd want someone to stand up for her." The next morning, Grace played the footage for her legal team. It was damning. Evelyn stood inches from Ariel, clippers in hand, her eyes alight with something disturbingly triumphant. Even without audio, her glee was obvious. The nurse's hesitation, Ariel's pleading posture. It was undeniable. This wasn't about rules. This was cruelty. Grace turned to Eric and Naomi. This is it. This is the smoking gun. By noon, Malik had published the story under the bold headline, Hidden Fund, Hidden Abuse, the Rot at the Heart of Lakeside School. The public exploded. Thousands marched. The governor tweeted. And Ariel Daniels, once a silent victim, became a symbol. But justice wasn't done yet. Because Evelyn Rohr still had powerful friends in high places. And they weren't about to go down quietly. By sunrise the next day, the city of Brookshire was no longer just following Ariel's story, they were living it. Outside Lakeside School, a sea of protest signs danced in the cold wind. Justice for Ariel. End racist school policies. Fire Evelyn Rohr now. The chant of hundreds echoed down the streets. Students, parents, teachers, even veterans stood shoulder to shoulder in unity. What had begun as a local scandal had now ballooned into a national reckoning. But behind the walls of power, the tone was far more sinister. In a discreet downtown office, 3 influential figures sat in tense conversation. James Patterson, Valerie Simmons, and Robert Walsh, top members of the Lakeside School Board, leaned over a polished mahogany table, their faces pale, brows furrowed. This thing has spiraled out of control, Patterson muttered, pouring himself a stiff drink. If we don't get ahead of it, we're going to lose everything. Valerie Simmons adjusted her pearl earrings, her voice cold and calculated. I told you from the beginning that Evelyn was a liability. We should have cut her loose years ago. She has powerful connections, Walsh reminded them. Her brother's in the state senate. Her cousin runs the teachers' union. If she goes down, she might take us all with her. Valerie scoffed. If this goes to court, that footage will bury her. And us. We have to pressure the Daniels family to settle. Quietly. James leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. No settlement. We send a message. If they won't back off, we make them. That night, Eric returned home from a meeting with Grace to find a white envelope taped to his front door. No return address, no markings. Just one line typed in bold letters. Stop now or you'll regret it. Naomi's hands shook as she read the note. They're threatening us. Eric's expression didn't waver. He'd received threats before, in war zones, foreign missions, covert operations. But never had one chilled him like this. Because this time the war was at his doorstep. And the enemy was hiding behind school walls and polished suits. I'll alert Grace and Malik, he said, already scanning the street. And we'll install cameras, double locks, everything. But we don't run. We fight smarter. Naomi touched his arm. We won't let them scare Ariel. Eric nodded. They're not just afraid of us. They're afraid of the truth we carry. Meanwhile, Malik Reed worked through the night. Every tip, every file, every whisper he could gather became part of the growing web he was stitching together. Then one evening a breakthrough came. A confidential source from inside the school district, another whistleblower, sent him scanned documents, records of secret meetings between board members and state politicians. The content was chilling. Discussions of containment, of redirecting media narratives, even plans to replace Ariel's story with staged scandals elsewhere. Worst of all, the existence of a fund, millions of dollars allocated to silencing students and parents in exchange for non-disclosure agreements. Malik's blood boiled as he read the phrase, maintain control. No precedent. We lose this, we lose the district. The next morning Malik published his exposé. Its title blared across screens nationwide. District of Silence, the system designed to protect predators. It exploded across social media. Cable news debated it. Federal attorneys took notice. The fallout was instantaneous. Parents across the state demanded answers. Students walked out of class. And in a surprise announcement, the governor scheduled a press conference. Meanwhile, Evelyn Rohr watched the news alone in her home, her hands clenched on the arms of her recliner. The smugness that once lit her eyes was gone, replaced by something wild, desperate. They think I'm finished, she hissed. They think they can ruin me. She glanced toward a dusty old chest in the corner of the room. Inside were files, photos, names, leverage she'd collected over years. She still had one card left to play. And she wasn't going down without a fight. But Evelyn wasn't the only one planning her next move. That afternoon, Grace Yamada met with Eric, Naomi, and Malik in her office. The room buzzed with quiet intensity. This is bigger than a civil lawsuit now, Grace said. We're talking federal offenses, conspiracy, obstruction, abuse of power. And you, she looked at Malik, just open the floodgates. Eric leaned forward. What's next? We go to trial, Grace replied. But first, a public hearing. Naomi blinked. A what? A state-level hearing on educational malpractice and civil rights violations. I've already pushed it through with the help of the governor's office. Ariel will have to testify. Eric hesitated. She's still healing. Grace nodded. And if she's not ready, we'll protect her. But she doesn't have to be perfect. She just has to be brave. And Ariel already is. That night, Eric sat beside his daughter on her bed watching her sketch. The strokes were slow, deliberate. Her bald head gleamed softly beneath the desk lamp. "Sweetheart," he said, voice gentle, "there's something I want to ask you." She looked up, eyes wide and steady. "There's going to be a public hearing. People will be listening. They'll want to hear your story. You don't have to do it, but if you're ready, the world needs to hear you." Ariel was quiet for a long time. Then, without speaking, she turned her sketchbook toward him. It was a self-portrait. A bald girl, small in frame, but standing tall in front of a crowd, a microphone in front of her, courage in her eyes. Below the drawing, in Ariel's neat handwriting, were 4 words. "I'm ready to speak." The day of the public hearing arrived under a gray, restless sky. At the state capitol, security officers directed crowds into a sprawling chamber lined with wood-paneled walls and high-arching windows. Cameramen adjusted their equipment, microphones blinked red with recording lights, and reporters scribbled notes with anticipation. The name Ariel Daniels was now etched into the national consciousness, no longer just a victim but a symbol. Inside the chamber, the front row was reserved for Ariel and her family. Eric wore his military dress uniform, its medals polished to a shine. Naomi sat beside him, calm but visibly tense, holding Ariel's hand. Ariel, wearing a simple white dress and a turquoise scarf wrapped around her head, sat straight-backed, her sketchbook in her lap. She was the smallest person in the room, but today she would carry the heaviest truth. At the far end of the chamber sat the State Education Oversight Committee, 9 lawmakers each with a stack of documents, prepared questions and serious expressions. Among them sat a woman who had become a fierce ally to the family in recent weeks, Governor Eleanor Richards. As the session began, Committee Chairwoman Claudia Monroe tapped her gavel. This hearing will address allegations of misconduct, discrimination, and systemic cover-up within the Lakeside School District. Today we'll hear testimony from those directly impacted. Grace Yamada stood first, her voice clear and firm as she outlined the case. She referenced Evelyn Rohr's history, the viral footage, the school board's secret fund, and the threats made against the Daniels family. Then she turned toward the rows of seats where Ariel sat. "I now call Ariel Daniels to the stand." A murmur moved through the crowd. Cameras pivoted. All eyes fell on the 12-year-old girl who slowly stood, clutched her sketchbook, and walked down the aisle with steady steps. As she reached the witness chair and sat, the microphone was lowered to her height. Claudia Monroe gave her a gentle smile. "Ariel, thank you for being here today. You're incredibly brave. Take your time." Ariel opened her sketchbook and placed it before her like a shield. She inhaled deeply, her voice quiet, but not weak. "My name is Ariel Daniels. I'm 12 years old. I love drawing, science, and my mom's blueberry pancakes." A ripple of soft laughter broke the tension in the room. She continued, voice trembling slightly. "I have a condition called alopecia. It makes my hair fall out in patches. For a long time, I hid it. I wore braids to feel normal, to feel like myself." Her hands tightened around the sketchbook. "Miss Evelyn Rohr was my teacher. One day she told me my hair violated the rules. I tried to explain. I told her I had alopecia. I said my mom and the principal had approved it before. But she didn't care." Ariel paused, blinking away tears. "She dragged me to the nurse's office and made the nurse shave my head. I begged her to stop. I cried. But she just stood there and watched like it didn't matter. Like I didn't matter." The room was silent. No rustling paper, no whispering press. Only Ariel's voice filling the chamber. "She told me, your father will learn what it feels like to lose his honor." Gasps erupted across the room. The committee members looked at one another in disbelief. Ariel continued, steadier now. "At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. But now I do. She hated my father. She wanted to hurt him through me." Grace leaned forward. "And how did that make you feel, Ariel?" Ariel's voice dropped almost to a whisper. "Small. Like I didn't belong. Like I was nothing." Naomi's hand flew to her mouth. Eric stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched, his soldier's control barely holding. "But I'm not nothing," Ariel said suddenly, her voice rising. "I'm more than my hair. I'm more than a target. And I'm not afraid of Miss Evelyn anymore. The room broke into applause. Ariel returned to her seat. The crowd stood for her. Lawmakers dabbed their eyes. Even seasoned reporters looked shaken. Next to testify were other former students, Jasmine, Marcus, Aaliyah, each recounting the same pattern. Of Evelyn targeting black students, of Principal Wexley looking the other way, of subtle cruelty masked as discipline. With every story the case became clearer. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. A system. Then Grace stood again, holding a printed document high for all to see. This is Evelyn Rohr's military discharge order. Signed by Lieutenant Colonel Eric Daniels. It outlines multiple instances of racial bias, insubordination, and conduct unbecoming. She was removed from duty not because of politics, but because she was a danger to others. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was revenge. The chamber erupted again. Back at Lakeside, Evelyn Rohr sat alone in her living room, watching the hearing on her television. Her hands trembled around a cold cup of coffee. Her face was pale, eyes hollow. For the first time she realized, this wouldn't fade. The world wasn't going to forget. At the close of the hearing, Governor Richards stood, her voice resolute. I want to thank Ariel Daniels and every brave soul who spoke today. Your testimony has moved us and more importantly, it has ignited a movement. She paused. I'm proud to announce that our office is drafting legislation to protect every student's dignity and safety, called the Ariel Protection Act. A standing ovation swept through the chamber. Ariel turned toward her parents. Eric had tears in his eyes. Naomi held her tight. For the first time in months, Ariel didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a voice the world was finally listening to. The morning after the hearing, the world woke up changed. News outlets ran headlines like wildfire. Ariel Daniels stuns the nation with brave testimony. Systemic racism in Lakeside schools exposed at state level. Governor introduces Ariel Protection Act following shocking revelations. The Daniels family's home became a sanctuary of calls, messages, and flower deliveries. Parents from across the country reached out with gratitude and heartbreak, sharing their own stories of silent suffering. Ariel's name was no longer just trending, it had become a movement. But for every ounce of support came a gust of backlash. In the shadows of chat forums and anonymous social media accounts, a new wave of attacks emerged. They accused the family of seeking fame, of exaggeration, of destabilizing the school system. Bots and real users alike flooded timelines with hateful comments, conspiracy theories, and calls to restore order. Naomi saw the posts first. She quickly closed the screen, shielding Ariel from it. But Eric, ever the soldier, refused to be blindsided. Let them bark, he said grimly. It means we're hitting the right nerve. Still, the tension was undeniable. Behind every cheer of support was the lurking whisper of resistance. Eric's military intuition told him that the real war, the one behind curtains and closed doors, was just beginning. And he wasn't wrong. At a private country club tucked away on the city's edge, James Patterson, Valerie Simmons, and Robert Walsh huddled in a secluded meeting room. The Lakeside School Board scandal had cost them dearly, public trust, political capital, and now their positions were on the line. This is spiraling, Walsh grunted, loosening his tie. We've got the governor breathing down our necks, civil rights attorneys circling like hawks, and now this Protection Act gaining support by the hour. Valerie crossed her arms. If we let this go to trial, we're done. Publicly. Professionally. Legally. James Patterson poured himself a drink. Then we shut it down before it gets there. And how exactly do you propose we do that? Walsh asked. We remind them, James said slowly, that pushing too far has consequences. The message came in the form of another envelope, this time, slipped into Malik Reed's office after dark. Inside was a note and a flash drive. You're playing with fire. If this trial proceeds, we release everything. The flash drive contained doctored footage, edited emails, and fabricated messages, carefully constructed to paint Grace, Malik, and even Ariel's family as opportunists. It was meant to intimidate, to discredit. But Malik was no rookie. The next morning, Malik walked straight into Grace Yamada's law office, the drive in hand. His face was tight with fury, his voice low. They tried to frame us. Grace's eyes narrowed. Let them try. She opened the drive and began analyzing the files, already spotting the edits and inconsistencies. This isn't just desperation, she said. It's a cover-up operation. Coordinated, funded, and very, very illegal. Eric, seated across from them, leaned forward. If they're this scared, it means we're close. Naomi nodded. Closer than we think. That afternoon, Grace made a bold move. She held a surprise press conference on the courthouse steps, revealing the attempted blackmail. She displayed screenshots of the threats, called out the smear tactics, and declared publicly, "We will not be silenced. And we will not stop." The story exploded. Overnight, the narrative shifted again. The public, once unsure, now saw the Daniels fight not as a personal vendetta, but as a battle against a corrupted system desperate to protect itself. Amid the chaos, Ariel found quiet solace in her art. She had returned to painting, furiously, passionately. Her new works were bolder than before, more raw. Her latest piece, a large canvas covered in vivid strokes of red and gold, showed a girl standing atop a crumbling building, her arms outstretched, holding back a storm. When she showed it to Eric, he was silent for a long time. Then he said, This is power." The next weekend, Ariel and Maya hosted the first Stripped Project workshop, an art therapy initiative they created together to help students express trauma through creativity. Dozens attended. Some drew. Others painted. A few just sat quietly, knowing they were safe for the first time in a long while. At the front of the room, Ariel stood and said to the group, "You don't have to be loud to be strong. You don't have to shout to be brave. You just have to speak your truth." The room applauded softly. Many cried. Back in the legal world, Grace filed a full federal civil rights lawsuit against Evelyn Rohr, Principal Wexley, and the Lakeside School Board, citing emotional trauma, discriminatory retaliation, and systemic abuse. The court accepted the case. A date was set, and the trial of the year was about to begin. But as the Daniels family prepared for court, Ariel's story caught the attention of someone unexpected. Governor Eleanor Richards called a press conference. Standing beneath the marble pillars of the state capitol, she addressed the public. "Today, I am proud to announce the official introduction of the Ariel Protection Act, a bill that will guarantee dignity, safety, and transparency for every student in our state." She continued, her voice unwavering. "No teacher, no administrator, no district will ever again be allowed to weaponize policy as a tool of racism or revenge." Across the city, Ariel sat watching the broadcast, her hand gently clasped in her father's. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Because now the world was speaking for her. The sun barely pierced the horizon when a black government-issued SUV pulled up in front of the Daniels residence. It wasn't a surprise. Grace had warned them the subpoena delivery would be formal. The family had entered a new phase of battle. One that would unfold not on TV or on the courthouse steps, but in the courtroom itself. Inside the car, Ariel sat between her parents, sketchbook in her lap, the windows reflecting her calm but cautious face. They were headed for pretrial hearings, motions, arguments, and witness preparations. Grace had already submitted the key pieces of evidence. The video Maya had taken, the nurse's signed affidavit, Evelyn's military discharge, and the audio recordings Malik had uncovered in the leaked school board meetings. But today wasn't about evidence. It was about presence. And the Daniels family intended to be seen. As they entered the courthouse, cameras flashed like lightning. News crews jostled for position. Reporters shouted questions, hoping for a soundbite. "Ariel, how are you feeling today? Lieutenant Colonel Daniels, what do you want to say to the school board? Do you think justice is finally within reach?" Eric's only response was a steady nod as he opened the courthouse door for his daughter. Inside, the tone was drastically different. Clean, cold, and clinical. The kind of place where truth is often filtered through procedure. Yet as the judge entered and the bailiff called the room to order, Grace rose with the poise of someone who had fought this war before, and won. On the opposite bench sat Evelyn Rohr, looking thinner and older, her eyes sunken, her lips drawn into a thin, humorless line. Her once imposing posture now seemed defensive. Her lawyer, a sharp-suited man named Conrad Milson, whispered constantly into her ear, but she barely responded. It was the look of someone realizing that the armor they'd worn for years no longer protected them. "Your Honor," Milson began, "we move to dismiss this case on grounds of procedural irregularity and character smearing, citing unverified video evidence and emotional testimony designed to sway public opinion." Grace stood, barely concealing her disgust. "The defense seeks to erase a 12-year-old's lived trauma by dismissing corroborated video, sworn affidavits, and an active investigation into institutional cover-up. We oppose." Judge Marilyn DeWitt, a firm yet fair woman known for her zero tolerance toward abuse of power, adjusted her glasses and leaned forward. "Motion to dismiss is denied. This case proceeds." A murmur of relief and vindication ran through the public gallery. Ariel, sitting quietly in the front row, gently pressed her fingers to the edges of her sketchbook. Naomi reached over and squeezed her hand. Outside the courtroom things were boiling. Malik reads latest article, "The walls are cracking at Lakeside. Internal sources speak out," had just gone live, featuring interviews with former teachers, students, and even a junior board administrator who had seen the hush fund documents firsthand. The story tore across social media like a lightning strike. Hashtags surged back to the top. Hashtag justice for Ariel, hashtag dismantle the system, hashtag strip the silence. The public pressure was relentless. And now so was the law. Later that day, Grace gathered the Daniels family and her legal team into her office. "They're cornered," she said simply. "And people like Evelyn and Wexley? When they're cornered, they either beg for settlement, or they try to bury the truth." Eric leaned forward. "They already tried that. The fake emails. The threats." "Yes," Grace replied, "but I have reason to believe something bigger is coming." She handed Eric a folder. Inside were screenshots of encrypted messages intercepted from a whistleblower in the school board's IT department. Alex Baker again. The content? Plans to leak a falsified psychological report claiming Ariel had fabricated her condition, and that the footage had been manipulated. Naomi's face turned white. "They're going after a child, again?" Eric's voice was ice. "No, not this time." Grace nodded. "I've already filed an injunction with the court. Any such release will be considered obstruction of justice and retaliation against a minor. If they leak it, they go to prison." But the move confirmed something they all suspected. The defendants weren't just trying to win. They were trying to survive. And that made them dangerous. That night, Ariel returned home to find a package on the porch. Inside, a set of art supplies and a note. "You don't know me, but your courage gave me strength. My daughter was bullied out of school last year. You made her believe in herself again. Thank you." Tears welled in Ariel's eyes. For the first time since the shaving, they were not tears of pain, but of validation. She sat down, pulled out her brush, and began painting something new. A tree. Its trunk scarred and twisted, but its branches reaching skyward, vibrant with color. When Eric passed by her door and saw it, he asked softly, "What's it called?" Ariel didn't look up. She was still painting. Resilience. The next morning, as the trial formally opened, the courthouse was surrounded not by a media circus, but by a peaceful crowd, hundreds of parents, students, and teachers holding candles and signs. Eric, Naomi, and Ariel walked through the crowd hand in hand. And as they entered the building, a familiar voice called out, "Keep going, Ariel. You're changing the world." She turned to look. It was Maya, smiling through tears. And Ariel smiled back. Not because the battle was over, but because, for the first time, she knew she was winning. The courtroom was packed. Rows of spectators lined the benches, journalists clutching notepads, community leaders sitting shoulder to shoulder, and students who had once walked Lakeside's polished halls now watching history unfold. The quiet hum of anticipation lingered in the air like static before a storm. Grace Yamada stood at the prosecution table, calm but electric. Her voice carried authority, not just as a lawyer, but as a woman speaking on behalf of every child who had ever been silenced. "Your Honor, today we begin presenting the truth, not just of what happened to Ariel Daniels, but of how a system built to educate and protect our children was weaponized to humiliate and destroy." She paused, letting the words settle like weight on everyone's chest. "We call our first witness, Nurse Patricia Adams." A hush fell as the school nurse, graying, nervous but determined, took the stand. Patricia adjusted her glasses and spoke slowly, the tremor in her voice betraying the memory she carried. "Ms. Rohr brought Ariel into my office that day without warning. She said the student's hair was in violation of grooming policy. I knew Ariel had alopecia. I'd seen her medical file. I hesitated, told her this wasn't right. But Ms. Rohr, she was forceful. She told me I'd lose my job if I didn't comply." "And did you?" Grace asked gently. Patricia nodded, eyes moist. "I turned on the clippers. I tried. I tried to stop, but the damage was already done. I saw Ariel crying. I'll never forget that look. Like she was disappearing right in front of me." "And did you feel coerced?" "Yes, completely. I filed a report that same day." The principal never responded. Grace turned to the judge. "Let the record reflect. Not only was there active abuse, but documented negligence by the administration." On the other side of the room, Evelyn Rohr's face remained stone. But her knuckles whitened around the edge of her chair. Next, Grace called Maya Thompson. The courtroom watched as the young girl walked to the witness stand with a calm that defied her age. Maya held up her phone, the very one she had used to record the infamous footage. "I didn't know what else to do," she said. "I saw my friend being dragged out of class. Everyone else was frozen. So I hit record." Grace leaned in. "Why?" "Because Ariel is my best friend. And because I knew nobody would believe her unless they saw it with their own eyes." Grace played the video. The entire courtroom fell silent as the footage unfolded. Evelyn grabbing Ariel's arm. The nurse's hesitation. Ariel's shoulders shaking in silence. And finally, Evelyn's cruel smile as the first braid fell to the ground. Even the judge looked away for a moment. When the video ended, Grace turned to the jury. "That is what silence looks like. That is what abuse of power sounds like when no one speaks up." One by one, the witnesses took the stand. Former students who'd been punished for their hairstyles, called unprofessional or unfit. Teachers who'd tried to report Evelyn but were ignored. And finally, Eric Daniels himself. The courtroom seemed to shrink around him as he stepped forward in full uniform. He took the oath and stared across the room, not at Evelyn but at his daughter. "I've seen war. I've led men into combat. I've made decisions under fire that I'll carry for the rest of my life. But nothing prepared me for what I saw in that video." His voice cracked. "That was my daughter. And she wasn't in danger on some foreign battlefield. She was in a classroom. In our own country. Under the care of people who were supposed to protect her." He turned to the jury, his voice sharpening. This wasn't about rules. This was about power. About revenge. About a broken woman with a personal vendetta using a child to settle an old score. Then came the moment no one expected. Grace called Evelyn Rohr to the stand. The courtroom gasped. Her attorney objected. Hostile witness, relevance, emotional bias. But the judge allowed it. Evelyn rose slowly as if gravity itself resisted her. On the stand, her eyes darted nervously as Grace approached. "Ms. Rohr, you served under Lieutenant Colonel Eric Daniels, didn't you?" Yes," Evelyn answered tightly. "And you were discharged under his command due to multiple complaints of racially charged behavior. Is that correct?" "That's not why." "Let me remind you, you're under oath." Evelyn's jaw tensed. "Yes." Grace's voice became colder. "Did you say to Ariel Daniels, your father will know what it feels like to lose his honor?" Silence. The courtroom waited. "Yes," Evelyn said finally, barely audible. Gasps erupted across the room. The judge struck her gavel. "Order." Grace stepped closer. "So you admit this wasn't about a grooming policy. It was about vengeance." Evelyn's eyes filled with rage. "He destroyed my life. I gave everything to the military and he tore it away from me." Grace's voice rose, unwavering. "And so you destroyed a little girl's dignity to punish her father." Evelyn's face collapsed in shame. "I didn't mean to." "But you did." The silence that followed was deafening. After court adjourned, the Daniels family walked slowly through the courthouse corridor. Cameras waited at the exit, but this time they didn't run. Ariel walked in the middle, holding both parents' hands. She didn't hide her face. She didn't need to. Because the world had just seen the truth. And now it was time for judgment. The jury had been deliberating for nearly 7 hours. Outside the courthouse, the air was heavy with anticipation. Crowds had gathered since sunrise, lining the steps with candles, handwritten signs, and silent prayers. Inside, the courtroom remained hushed, tension rippling across the rows like a wave waiting to crash. Ariel sat beside her parents at the plaintiff's table, her hands calmly folded atop her sketchbook. The courtroom lights glinted off her turquoise scarf, now a quiet symbol of resilience to those watching across the country. She didn't speak, but her eyes, deep and steady, were louder than any words. Then the doors opened. The bailiff entered, solemn and composed. "All rise. The jury has reached a verdict." Everyone stood. The jury filed in. At their center, the forewoman, a middle-aged teacher with kind eyes and a hard-won weariness, clutched the slip of paper that would change everything. Judge DeWitt read it aloud. "In the matter of Ariel Daniels versus Evelyn Rohr, Principal Thomas Wexley, and the Lakeside School District, we the jury find the defendants guilty of all charges, including emotional trauma, discriminatory abuse and civil rights violations." A wave of emotion rippled through the courtroom. Naomi gasped, tears sliding down her cheeks. Eric bowed his head, jaw clenched tight as his soldier's discipline buckled under the weight of the moment. The forewoman continued. We further award the plaintiff $10 million in compensatory damages and recommend a federal investigation into the Lakeside School Board's pattern of misconduct. Cheers erupted in the gallery. Reporters scrambled to push notifications. Hashtags surged online within seconds. Hashtag justice for Ariel, hashtag they did not win, hashtag dismantle the system. But the room wasn't finished with surprises. Just as Judge DeWitt called for order, two uniformed officers entered quietly through a side door. They moved swiftly down the aisle, stopping directly behind Evelyn Rohr. One officer produced a warrant and read aloud. Evelyn Rohr, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, falsifying school records, and unlawful retaliation against a minor. Evelyn's breath hitched. Her eyes darted around, desperate, humiliated. You can't, I didn't know they'd. You knew, the officer said firmly. Stand up, please. In stunned silence, the courtroom watched as the once proud teacher was handcuffed and led away, her head bowed, not in shame but in defeat. The echo of her footsteps felt like thunder behind the verdict. At the defense table, Principal Wexley sat frozen, pale as chalk. The gavel struck again. Mr. Wexley, Judge DeWitt said, her tone sharp, a formal review of your conduct and position will be submitted to the State Board of Education. You are hereby relieved of your duties pending further investigation. Outside, the crowd erupted into cheers as word spread. A verdict had been reached and justice had spoken, not with a whisper but a roar. Eric stepped outside, Ariel's hand in his. Naomi followed, tears still streaking her face but now mixed with joy. Camera crews surged forward. Ariel, a reporter called out. How do you feel after the verdict? Ariel turned and for the first time, stepped in front of the microphones herself. I feel like I'm finally whole again, she said. Not because they were punished, but because now kids like me know they don't have to stay silent. Another voice shouted from the crowd, what do you want people to remember about this moment? Ariel paused. Then she smiled, her voice clear, strong and without fear. That even the smallest voice can start a revolution. As the Daniels family made their way through the cheering crowd, another scene unfolded at the office of the governor. Governor Eleanor Richards sat flanked by lawmakers and education leaders. Before her was a binder, thick, embossed and labeled in bold type. The Aerial Protection Act, Final Draft. She looked directly into the cameras broadcasting live to the entire state. Today, I am proud to sign into law the Aerial Protection Act, legislation that will ensure no child is ever punished for their differences, silenced for their voice, or targeted by those meant to protect them. The pen struck paper. Applause erupted across the room. In schools across the state, educators watched with their students. Some cried. Some cheered. And many looked around their classrooms, reflecting on the responsibility they now carried. At home, Ariel sat in her room painting. This time it was a mural, a field of flowers, each one different, each one vibrant. In the center stood a figure with no hair, arms raised to the sky, surrounded by light. Naomi walked in, speechless at the beauty. What's this one called? She asked softly. Ariel turned and smiled. Justice. But even as the Daniels family began to breathe again, a final twist lingered, one that neither courtroom nor governor could predict. That evening, Malik Reed received an anonymous package at his door. Inside, a ledger. Handwritten. Fragile with age. Was a list. Dozens of names. Dates. Payments. Confidential settlements. The earliest entry dated back nearly 20 years. At the bottom, one line stood out in sharp ink. Every voice silenced is a story that might one day rise. Malik stared at it, eyes narrowing. Because this wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of something far bigger. 6 months had passed since the courtroom erupted in applause, since Evelyn Rohr was escorted away in handcuffs, and since the Aerial Protection Act officially became law. But for the Daniels family, the story hadn't ended. It had simply grown deeper, richer, and more expansive. Their lives had changed in ways they never imagined. Invitations poured in from across the country. Schools, universities, advocacy conferences, civil rights galas. Ariel had become a voice for the voiceless, her image featured in magazines and art exhibits, her testimony quoted by state senators. But despite the fame, the media, the noise, she stayed grounded. She was still the girl who sketched in silence. Still the girl who preferred paintbrushes to microphones. And now she had found a new purpose, helping others reclaim their stories. Every Saturday morning in a sunlit studio downtown, Ariel hosted her art therapy program, The Stripped Project. It had expanded from a modest workshop into a statewide initiative with student chapters in over 50 schools. Each gathering was filled with color, music, and soft laughter, sounds of healing, of release, of children finally feeling safe enough to create. Maya was always by her side, leading the younger students, showing them how to blend oils or trace figures with soft charcoal. Sometimes they'd sit quietly with a child who didn't want to speak, letting the silence do its work. They had learned that some traumas need time, and that not every wound heals out loud. One day, a girl with vitiligo, white patches across her skin, painted her face as a tree with blooming leaves. She titled it Becoming Visible. A boy who had been suspended repeatedly for defiance drew a portrait of himself with chains breaking off his arms. He titled it Freedom is in Trouble. Ariel didn't need to ask them what the paintings meant. She understood, because she had lived it. Back at Lakeside Elementary, the changes were dramatic and sincere. Under the new leadership of Principal Jason Reed, a former art teacher and the first black principal in the district's history, the school had become a model of inclusivity and reform. Strict grooming policies were eliminated. Restorative justice practices replaced punishments. And a mural now adorned the entrance. Dozens of children in every color and hairstyle imaginable, standing beneath a banner that read, "Every child has a place here." In its center, a bald girl smiled with her eyes closed, face lifted to the sun. The community had rallied too. Parents volunteered more. Teachers listened better. And silence, the dangerous kind, was no longer welcome. Meanwhile, at home, Ariel was working on her largest canvas yet. It filled the wall of her bedroom. The image, a young girl with her arms stretched out like wings, standing atop a courthouse roof. Around her, petals spiraled upward, forming faces, dozens of them, children of all shapes, sizes, and colors rising toward the sky. Eric stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching his daughter as she added the final details. He had been through wars, loss, betrayal. But nothing had shaken him like what had happened to his child. And nothing had filled him with more pride than seeing the girl she had become. "You've turned pain into power," he said softly. Ariel looked back over her shoulder. "I didn't do it alone." "No," Eric replied, his voice full of emotion. "But you let us." A week later, an invitation arrived, on thick cream paper, embossed with the presidential seal. The White House. Ariel Daniels had been selected to receive the Presidential Youth Medal for Courage and Civic Impact, the highest honor awarded to a civilian under 18. Eric, Naomi, and Ariel were flown to Washington, D.C., where they stood in the East Room, surrounded by dignitaries, educators, and civil rights leaders. The president herself placed the medal around Ariel's neck. "You reminded this nation of its promise," the president said, "that every child deserves dignity, every voice deserves to be heard, and every injustice deserves to be answered." Ariel didn't give a long speech. Just a few words. "I'm not brave because I wasn't afraid. I'm brave because I spoke anyway." As they flew home, Naomi turned to her daughter, brushing a hand across her smooth head. "Do you ever miss your hair?" Ariel looked out the window, the clouds rolling beneath them. "No," she said. "It was never who I was." Then she smiled. "I like who I am now." That fall, Ariel's final exhibition launched at the Smithsonian Institution's American History Museum. Stripped, a journey from silence to strength. Each room guided visitors through her story, not just her trauma, but her transformation. From pencil sketches of fear to full-scale paintings of power. The centerpiece was her courtroom sketch, a bold, stylized interpretation of herself standing at the witness stand, a beam of light cutting through the ceiling and illuminating her face. Beneath the painting, one line was engraved. "You tried to erase me, but I redrew myself." As thousands walked through the exhibit, parents holding children's hands, educators wiping tears, one thing became clear. Ariel's voice had reached beyond the courtroom, beyond the state, even beyond policy. She had become a mirror, for a generation learning to fight back. And as the years passed, her name wouldn't just be remembered for what was done to her, but for what she chose to do after. Sometimes the smallest voices echo the loudest. Ariel Daniels was never supposed to be heard, but when she spoke, the world listened. Her courage reminds us that justice doesn't begin in the courtroom. It begins the moment someone decides not to be silent. If this story moved you, share it. Comment below with your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that deserve to be heard.